Hello, this is a conversation about life and about storytelling. And we're glad to have as our partner today, Andy Mitchell. And I'll let Andy tell you about why his life is a story and why he's a real great storyteller in so many ways. So, Andy, we'll let you start it off.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Sure.
Yeah, my life is a story. I tell stories professionally as a filmmaker for National Geographic and Discovery and for a variety of other platforms like that, usually documentary-based stories. I do a lot of wildlife stuff, but I also do music, I do people, and whatever it is, I was drawn to this whole idea because story is the most important thing. Obviously, I'm a photographer first, I'm a camera person originally, that's how I came up into the storytelling world. But all the while, for so long, I was worried about taking the perfect picture. I was worried about taking the perfect shot. Then I realized without story, the shot doesn't mean anything. So whether it's a still photograph or a film, story is the backbone of anything that you're doing in my world. So along the way, I've been lucky enough to experience a number of my own stories, and then I started to write more. And so I was taking my own photographs and then crafting them into the story and trying to find the perfect balance of truth and also the ability to get people engaged. Because if it's a great story but you haven't engaged the viewer, then you're failing. You have to engage. It's an art. Storytelling is an art form, and you have to learn how to push the limits, especially in broadcast television where I do a lot of my work. You have to find that balance between integrity and edutainment. You know, you have to entertain, but you also have to be true to the facts. So it's been an interesting ride, and I love doing it. But every time it's hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, why don't you tell us some stories? I mean,
Okay.
This is story time.
Yeah, it's story time.
Okay.
There's three stories that stand out that all happened in a very small window of time, probably in about 2 years. And they all somehow have to do with my mortality. Because throughout my 20s and early 30s, I was invincible. I was untouchable. I could do anything. I could jump off anything. I could face any shark, and I was never going to get hurt. And of course, I knew I wasn't, but I honestly felt that way. And then there were three stories that happened. One where I got lost at sea at night after a scuba dive expedition. One where I was in a plane crash in Congo. And then one where I had the tip of my pinky torn off in the middle of the ocean off Brazil. I'm trying to think which would be the best one to tell, but I think actually the whale shark story would. We were filming a giant spawning aggregation of snapper. So every full moon in the spring months, April, May, June, off the coast of Belize. Belize has the second largest barrier reef on the planet. So there's one little area 30 miles off the coast called Gladden Spit that every full moon, around 3 or 4 days on either side of the full moon, tens of thousands of these Kubera snapper, big 4 or 5 foot long snapper, come and they spawn. So you'll get them and they do these giant volcanoes of spawn, but they don't spawn until 20 minutes before the sun sets. So it's incredibly protected area. So we're the only ones out there. It's one ponga, which is like a sort of makeshift carved out, dug out boat. Me, basically my mentor, the guy who taught me everything I know about wildlife filmmaking, and a Belizean boat captain. So we're out there, we're waiting all day. You see these fish just resting down to 200 feet, just waiting for the event. And then 20 minutes before sunset, they just explode. And they explode in these giant volcanoes of eggs and milt, and it's in tens of thousands of fish. So it's an incredibly dramatic experience. But what we were actually there for was to get the whale sharks to come through. So this draws whale sharks from hundreds of miles. So you get 15, 20 of these 25, 30-foot whale sharks coming through, just feeding on the milt, just feeding on all the spawn. And that's what we're there. That was the big event. So it's me and my partner Richard. We're both filming, and we're supposed to be watching your back. But the second these things spawn, it just turns like you're swimming in milk. You can't see anything. And every once in a while, you'd run into a bull shark, and you both scare the hell out of each other, and you swim in opposite directions. So, short story long, we go in, you're in for about an hour because that's about the air you have. And by the end of it, I literally couldn't suck a single breath more of air out of my tank. It's pitch black out. I didn't have lights. And I pop up, and we're 30 miles off the coast, and it's completely pitch black. And the boat's nowhere to be seen. My safety diver is nowhere to be seen. And I know the current is bringing me straight to Venezuela. So for 45 minutes, I sat in the dark water without a light, terrified, no air, no emergency. I didn't have an EPIRB. I always dive now with an emergency beacon. All I had was a little rescue sausage. So I sat there floating in the current for 45 minutes, 40 miles from sea, 30 miles from land, just praying that they would find me. And luckily the boat captain knew exactly what he's doing, and he knew exactly where the current was, and he just, with his spotlight, just went back and forth in every direction the current was. And they finally pulled me out. But for those 45 minutes, I'd had my youngest son by that point too. So I was a dad, and 45 minutes I was basically crying, being drifted out to ski, saying goodbye to my son, and regretting being that stupid. And then, like I said, within the same year, I was in a plane crash in Congo and had the pinky tip torn off. So after that, I've been incredibly vincible. I am now very breakable, and it's changed my entire life. So that was a pretty pivotal story in sort of my career when I realized my own mortality.
So,
Hi.
In the whole process, talk about your pinky finger too. That's a great story. So.
Yeah, did I tell you that story?
You did.
Right.
So.
Okay, so this was also for National Geographic. That last one was for National Geographic as well. We were in Brazil. There's islands about 200 miles off the coast of Brazil's northeast corner, the closest land to Africa in South America. They're called Fernando de Noronha Islands. It's a series of small islands that we had to bend over backwards to get permission because it's incredibly protected. But living in this island in one little bay is called Dolphin Bay, are one of the world's largest population of spinner dolphins. And I don't know if you know spinners, but they're the ones that do the crazy, awesome 15 flips when they jump out. They're fantastic dolphins. So I went down on a scout a couple months before we were supposed to film, and it was spectacular. They were jumping 30 feet out of the air right in front of me, and I was taking stills and having a great time. So we set up the shoot, we jumped through hoops, we bribed the appropriate officials, and we got out there on a proper Nat Geo shoot. But right as we showed up, the next day, a giant Carnival cruise ship pulled up. The first cruise ship they'd ever allowed at these islands, which was just devastating. More people on the cruise ship than live on the island. And they're dropping anchors and shuttling boats back and forth right next to this Dolphin Bay. So it completely, all the sound, all the acoustics just sent the dolphins out of whack. They didn't know what was going on. Their calm paradise was being completely disrupted. So literally the day we show up to film, they're all messed up, and they're literally just the entire pod left. 600 or 700 dolphins normally live in this cove, and they were all just gone, and they were just circling the island, not knowing what to do. And it just changed the whole dynamic of the shoot. It was very difficult, and there were still very cool behaviors within the dolphins. For example, the males, you'd see the whole pod come, and what we would do, we would take the boat ahead of them. We'd find out where they are. We'd take the boat ahead. We'd jump in. They'd pass us. We'd get back in. And we do it all again. And we'd done it 6 or 7 times. And like I said, we're seeing some great behaviors. The males would deliberately come over here and be really high profile and do spins and making lots of noise and dances and stuff. And you'd see way down there, the females were sneaking by with the babies. So the males were distracting, hey, look over here, look over here, look over here, while the males and the babies would sneak around. It's an amazing defense technique. So anyway, I think it was 7 or 8 times after we had done this, jumped in, film, and swimming as hard as you can. We weren't on a proper dive boat because there are no proper dive boats here. We were on we call it a pirate ship, but it was an old rusty fishing boat. So 7th time we'd done this, I hand up my camera. I'm holding onto the ladder. I reach down to take my fin off, and a big swell comes, and the ladder goes like this, and just clips my finger off. And I pulled it out, and I looked up, and it just it was gone from the knuckle up. This is all on video. It's great. And I realized it was quite a big deal, and we emergency went back we immediately went back to the island, and there was a small clinic there where there was probably about a 14-year-old Brazilian kid who was supposed to be the doctor there. Cleaned me up and packed it up and gave me some painkillers so I could handle it. But I had to be emergency evac'd to Recife, to the island, to the mainland. And they had emergency surgery, and luckily everything went just fine. I won't get into the politics of insurance, but that's a whole other story.
That's another story.
And yeah, so then I had to spend 2 days, and I equated to, I don't know if you've seen Apocalypse Now, but when Martin Sheen is waiting for his deployment, and he's like in his hotel room going crazy, punching mirrors. I had my 2 days of my Apocalypse Now before I could go back out to the island, just to make sure the infections weren't holding. But it was fine, so I went back out of the island, and on the way back they held a little makeshift party for me and served frankfurters just to tease me about my finger. But the best part is I got my dive gear, and I shook out my glove, and out rolls my pinky tip, covered in maggots. So then we went the next day, and we made a sacrifice to the sea, and we donated my pinky tip to the ocean, to the god of the sea, to try to make, and we continued out the shoot, and we ended up getting the stuff we needed, and ended up being an interesting experience that I actually wouldn't change, believe it or not. It was dramatic, it was painful, but I wouldn't take it away for anything. It's kind of become a part of who I am. Yeah.
You spend a lot of time then in seeing nature and nature changes, and can you talk about that a little bit? What have you learned from that process?
Well, I've learned a lot from nature.
Or tell a story.
I've learned a lot from nature on two folds. One is just that the power of nature is beyond anything that I think man can bring to the table. But also, unfortunately, the first thing that jumps to mind when you ask that question is when I've returned to places that I've filmed before. For example, I've been to the Amazon, and then I'll go back to the same location in the Amazon 10 years later, and to see the destruction with my own eyes. You hear about it all the time. Everybody talks about it to the point where you almost get desensitized to the dramatic nature of how quickly things like the Amazon are being cut down. But when you go, and then you go 10 years later, and that forest that we stayed in last time is now an oil field, or a logging road, or that's the most devastating bit. And I see that time and time again. Everywhere you go, it's a little bit worse 10 years later. And it feels like
just keeps eroding.
It just keeps going.
Yeah.
And it's us just chipping away slowly.
Any signs of improvement or help?
There are so many. The only signs of optimism are the people that are doing the work. I still haven't seen any real sign. There are some, yes, there are, when I think about it, there are signs of improvement, but in really micro scales, where there's people who've designed programs and are really working to rebuild the habitat, and it's working, but on a very small scale. Now the optimism comes from what they're learning might help to grow on a larger scale eventually. So hopefully it's the beginning of a tide, but it's the people that the people are the bad part and the people are the good part. The people are the ones who can be able to save it, because there's so many people out there that are so passionate about learning as much as they can and doing everything they can to save it. That's where my big glimmer of hope lies.
I was, when you mentioned people, I was caught by your comment about your mentor. And not everybody can say real clearly, this was my mentor, or this is my mentor. Can you talk about this person?
I've been very, very lucky. I actually wince a little bit at the term, as my son would say. It's a bit cringeworthy, but it is exactly what it is. And I've been lucky enough to have a number of people over the course of my life who have really not only had the experience and the willingness to share that experience with me, but we've clicked as personalities. The one I was originally talking about is a couple who lived in Belize, named Richard and Carol Foster, and they made the world for themselves in Belize, and they were producing National Geographic BBC documentaries way back when in the golden era, before cable TV or anything. They were the ones with film and 3-minute mags, and spend 2 years out in the Kalahari filming. Amazing. So as 23, I was lucky enough to work at National Geographic for a couple of years, and I met these guys, and I said, can I come live with you? You don't need to pay me, I'll live on your couch, And they said, well, as a matter of fact, we're starting a new series and we can really use free labor. So I moved to Belize for a year and trained with them and made 8 movies and learned everything I could possibly learn. As a 20-something, I was just a sponge. I just loved, I always felt lucky to be there. I didn't ever really feel like I deserved it, so I worked extra hard to try to deserve it. And the people that I worked with really made all the difference. And they just helped in every single way and taught me everything they could. And like I said, I've had a number of them over the years. So now I try to pay it back, and I try to take people that show passion and interest and do the same to them and help them as much as I can and pay it forward, because I wouldn't be anywhere without the people that helped me.
So is the passion and interest as much a piece of that as the technology and the
100%
skills?
100%. The passion, interest, and in photography, it's also a bit of an eye. Early on, that same guy, Richard Foster, the first apprentice, sort of told me,
right,
you either have an eye or you don't. And he didn't know about me yet. So it was kind of telling me, like, well, we're going to find out quick here if you if you do or not. Yeah. And luckily, I guess I did enough.
Yes.
It would be a real bummer.
Because you've been doing it for a little while.
I've been doing it, you know. But to me, it's all about the passion, because entitlement doesn't work in this industry, because you're working 23-hour days sometimes and up to your waist in mud and covered by bugs and yellow fever and it's just, if you don't love it and if you don't have the passion, you're going to be scared away pretty quickly in some of the places we find ourselves, for sure. Yeah.
So is your mentor has been kind of that way for you all your working life, or as an example?
Yeah, very much. And yeah, all of them. I mean, the one thing that all the people that have really taught, none of them came from entitlement. None of them came from positions of privilege. They all fought and scratched and earned the positions they were in. And I always loved it.
And there's probably some reason or some event or some time in their life when this took hold, right?
Yeah.
And so different for each one?
Yeah, it's all different. I have another one of my favorites, unfortunately just passed away. He taught me everything I know about diving and filming underwater. And he just died of a brain tumor from diving too much, I think. But he started as a lobster fisherman and then just got really into the dive gear and became a master diver. And then he was diving for the Navy. Even though he wasn't in the Navy, he was pioneering the rebreathing, going down 350 feet, staying down for 18 hours, the crazy trimix, deep water rebreathers. And was a pioneer in that and was building. And this is a whole other thing that I loved about both of those people, both Richard and Bob. This is before Amazon, and this is before B&H, and this is before whatever you need, you can just Google it and you get it. This was when, oh God, we need this bit of gear, we have to make it. So they would go to the machine shop and they would make the underwater housing for the camera. Or they would make the water-cooled light to film the bats. And this gave a whole element of problem solving that I think, even though now I still can go on Amazon and I can still just usually source what I need, it's a different perspective on, here's a problem, how do you fix it with the available tools that we have, which is a resourcefulness that I'd never seen before and frankly didn't have growing up. So it was a weird lesson in, here's a problem, how do we fix it, get it done.
How did your love of adventure and get started as a kid for you? Was it there?
My father. My father was an Eagle Scout back when it was a big deal.
Yeah.
I think he grew up in the Midwest of Missouri, and he got to meet the president when he was 17 as the Boy Scout. I think he even got to go to the White House, and it was one of those, it was a big deal back then in the 50s, 40s, 50s, whenever he was in high school. And so we were always outside, and we were always hiking in the woods, and we were always, but I never really traveled all that much as a kid. We'd go on vacation, but I never been to Africa, never been to anywhere.
What state were you in at that point?
I grew up in Jersey.
In Jersey?
I'm one of those Jersey people rooting in Vermont, yeah. So all I ever wanted to do was travel.
Okay.
So out of college, I was just desperate to figure out a way to travel. And I also was a bit of a soapbox conservationist at that point.
Okay.
I was probably pretty annoying. I was pretty preachy about conservation. And I realize now that's the wrong way to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. You got to tell an engaging story and get people invested rather
That's
than
right.
just preach at them and tell them how bad they are.
Yeah, that's right.
But in my 20s, I was probably a bit of a jerk. But
Yeah, when you're convicted of something.
I was very convicted.
Yeah, I mean, when you're
Yes.
convicted, why shouldn't
How
everybody
dare you
else
take
be
the
convicted?
escalator, right?
That's
I mean,
right.
you should walk. It's, you know.
Yes,
And I realized
absolutely.
that's so wrong, and
Yeah,
like that's not
yeah.
the way to do it.
But it happens.
But
It's
it
part-
happened.
It's part of the weakness. So,
Yeah.
was photography the first avenue of expression for you? in that?
Actually, art.
Art.
At Middlebury
So-
College, I went to Middlebury College, and I was a fine arts
Okay.
major, actually.
All right.
So I painted and I drew, and photography was sort of a next extension of that. But I didn't really pick it up until college.
Hmm.
And I was at Middlebury. It's such a broad spectrum studio arts major that you have
Right.
the flexibility to try all the different mediums.
Right.
And I really enjoyed photography. And I would spend just hours. Back then we were still using film. So I would fall asleep in the darkroom, and just even now the smell of fixer, and I just had a weird connection to photography and just creating
It's
these
a different
images.
kind of space.
Oh, it's fantastic.
I used to be in a business
Oh, I
with
love
3
it.
guys,
Yeah, yeah.
and we took the pictures for the prom, at the college we went to, small college in Midwest, and then we'd spend 8 to 8 on Saturday, going
Right.
there, and I was the only one that had a bathtub,
Right.
so we used to put photographs into the rolls,
Yeah.
to
Oh, yeah.
dry them,
Yeah.
and my wife-to-be said she felt very special because she could come up and see all these people in the bathtub and see the pictures before anybody else did.
Before
So,
anybody else preview.
yeah.
Yeah, I love that smell though.
A
There's something
dark
about
room.
the dark room, just the dark and the red light, and I still have a nostalgic.
And
feeling about it.
the nice thing is, if someone wants to talk to you, they're going to talk to you. If they don't, you're in there, and they're there doing your job, and it's dark, and it's a great place.
I loved it. I always liked it when I was alone. I think that's when I wouldn't go at
Do you
night.
miss film?
I do and I don't. It's so much easier. I mean, just from a lazy point of view, it's so much easier. And now I shoot 6K red high def, super high def, and I have an hour long on a card before I got to even think about changing anything. And back then, when you're shooting Super 16, you get 11 minutes.
Right.
You know,
Right.
if you're shooting higher format, you get 3.5.
Right.
So it makes you lazier, but you're also collecting things that you normally wouldn't collect. And it's quite funny now because when you work with an editor, you'll take the perfect shot, but because it's video, I'll tend to roll early and roll late. And then so there'll be 5 or 6 seconds of junk, and then the shot, and then the editor always takes the junky part. They always take the take it down part, so-
Why didn't they see that? Right?
I don't know. It's
I mean,
like-
come on.
I think that's
It's
what the
pretty clear
broadcast television
what's
wants. They
important
want
here,
it fast
yeah.
and jumpy, and
Yeah. I just. Well, that's amazing.
yeah. But that's how the industry's changing.
Yeah. So, but these days, a lot of your work is not strictly on photography. It's movie making.
It's mostly movie making these days.
Okay.
Yeah. And I do sort of a half of it is actually in the field as the cameraman / director or in some capacity, and then half of it now is more in the storytelling. So I'm spending half my time writing, which is harder for me. It's not as easy to take a picture as it is to write a sentence for me.
Right.
But I've been challenging it and I've been pushing it and getting better at it. Frankly, half so I can be home more with my kids.
Right.
And half because, well, it's kind of a retirement plan. I can't do the crazy bits for much longer. So
Right.
I need to have a backup.
Well, you're a smart guy. That's good to know that better sooner rather than later.
I've seen, unfortunately, people make
Yeah.
the mistake and just all of a sudden they're obsolete.
Yeah, I talked to someone who said, I just can't keep. I used to be really great at multitasking and keeping everything in a list, but now if I get off that list, how to get back on that list?
Yeah.
So your children are young and active at this
7
point?
and 10.
7 and
Boys, they're
10.
great. And
Yeah,
right now, I'd rather
that's
just
great.
be out playing with them than doing anything else. So.
And your wife is a writer too, right?
My wife is a writer.
Yeah.
She's a much more talented. She's an actual writer. I'm a fake writer.
What do you mean a fake writer?
She's a real writer. I'm faking it as I go along.
Yeah.
She's like a real writer.
Yeah. What does she write?
She writes everything. She has worked for Gourmet Magazine. She writes stories. Her paying job is when we were living in D.C. She writes for political anything, marketing, and her talent is writing in any voice. So she can write as she's written for the dean of Harvard Medical School, and she's written for a potato farmer in Idaho.
Oh, that's
And she can
great.
and she can do that back to back. She can just turn the voices on and off like that. But now she's really trying to focus her writing on her passions, which are food and event production and sort of community building. And she's just really good at it. And she's navigating the whole social media world and figuring out writing's changing now.
Right.
The longer narratives are being diminished, and short, poppy, catchy, hooky things are.
Which is okay, but
There's a place for both.
Right.
There's definitely a place for both, and I think in the end it'll all even out.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, she's learning how to catch quickly, because that's
So
necessity.
do you have two writers in the making, do you think?
We definitely have one. I think we have a writer and an artist in the making.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
A great combination.
Yeah. So
that's
our dream would be
great affirmation.
they'd work together. But yeah, we have one. Our older son he really loves to write,
Yeah.
and he's a real wordsmith.
You're involved with a project locally that you've created. It's called Middlebury Underground, right?
Yes.
And so, would you want to tell us about that?
Sure. Middlebury Underground is a 501c3 nonprofit community events production organization. So, which basically means we are trying to do everything we can to offer shared experiences to everyone in the community, regardless of what they do, where they do it, their age, their demographic, their income bracket. We want to offer affordable events for everybody. And frankly, shared experiences that aren't as common here. And we're trying to curate and bring in events that Addison County doesn't see as many of. And you might get them in Chittenden and in Brooklyn and around, but so we're trying to just have fun doing it. And by doing it, bring in as many people as we can. We just had an event on Sunday called Foodaroo, and we had 27 food vendors and 2 bands and street performers and fortune tellers and the Rotary tied balloons, and there was a farmer's market and a kids zone and popcorn and cotton candy, and we worked really hard to come up with an event that there was something for everybody. And the rain luckily held off, and it was a really fun event. And it's been just a great experience working with Middlebury Underground, because we've met so many people that we didn't know, and we find there's a lot of people in this community doing similar things, and it's just really great to feel their energy and collaborate and come up with new ideas and keep building it, and I feel like we're starting to get some momentum, and we're really looking forward to taking it to the next step.
What have you done before this event? Could you put it in little history?
Yeah, this was our 4th Foodaroo. So we've done this summer festival, and every year it's been getting bigger and bigger, which has been great. And this year we almost doubled our attendance from last year, which is fantastic. But before that, we did a Medela at the Mountain, a concert in the Middlebury Snow Bowl last fall for United Way. Right. We've worked with United Way to help their causes. A lot of what we do, we try to tie to another nonprofit. So we'll help a local school or United Way or Courageous Stage, which is the Shakespeare classes the Town Hall Theater is spearheading. So and MCMC, the Middlebury Community Music Center, we try to take our skills and our experience, either throwing events or marketing or getting the word out or making videos, and help another deserving organization kind of get ahead and get a foot up. So we've thrown everything from highbrow parties to the Hillbilly Ball at the Marquee Theater. So it's just anything that we think would draw out a diverse demographic and people would enjoy. And we're not making any money on it, but that's not the point. We're doing it to get people out, and we've met so many different people across the board. It's been a wonderful experience.
That's great. I really enjoyed this time.
Good.
Time comes to an end in all things, I think,
Yeah.
or a
That's good.
pause. Maybe
Or a
we
pause.
continue to do this, or hear about other events and your stories.
Thank you. Fair enough.
It's really affirming to know and to meet and to hear people who really are excited about stories. I think it's and because it may help people catch a hold of what their story might be, or try that little thing that you were afraid that you should try, or whatever it might be, and or to realize life is just a marvelous thing. And so we thank you for doing that.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks for doing this.
Okay, good.
Right on.
We'll just wait.
Fair enough.
Good.